Hello, everyone. My name is Steve London, and I'm an attorney in Boston. I'm one of the national co-chairs for Jewish National Fund's Lawyers for Israel. We'd like to welcome Gabe Groisman and all of the attorneys around the United States who have joined us for our CLE program today. On behalf of the Jewish National Fund Lawyers for Israel, I want to express our appreciation to each of you in our community for your continued support and commitment to the land and people of Israel. Jewish National Fund has committed $160 million to rebuild southern Israel. We thank you for your support, as this is a monumental commitment, and together we will rebuild our homeland. This October 23rd to 26th, please join us for the Jewish National Fund USA Global Conference for Israel in Florida. It's critical that we stand together in support of Israel. Details may be found at jnf.org/global. As a member benefit of Lawyers for Israel, Jewish National Fund has an online national attorney referral directory in which you can upload your firm's practice areas and contact information. This is a wonderful resource which allows you to connect with like-minded pro-Israel attorneys throughout the country. There is a minimum annual contribution of $1,800. Please join me.
These beautiful regions were and always will be our beloved home.
This is where we chose to raise our children and build a promising future for our families and for generations to come.
Our hearts are tied to this land.
This is where our future goes.
It was never an easy journey. For the last 20 years, we've been the shield and armor of Israel, absorbing the blows, protecting our families and communities, but always hoping for a peaceful future.
For so many years, we've needed someone who makes us feel strong and that we are not alone.
Someone we can count on.
Someone who shares our passion for this land.
Someone who understands that this place is the backbone and the future of Israel.
Jewish National Fund USA has always been that someone.
For decades, you launched countless projects to transform our communities into the best places to live in Israel.
With the greatest educational programs in the country.
State-of-the-art medical facilities.
New housing initiatives that bring more families to our community.
Together, we turn this region into a wonderful place to live in.
With endless possibilities and a bright future.
Until that day.
In the aftermath of the massacre and tragedy of October 7th and the endless challenges faced by the people of Israel, Jewish National Fund USA's answer is loud and clear. We say with one voice, we believe in tomorrow.
I believe in the strength of this community.
I believe in our people's resilience and spirit.
I believe that Israel is still and always will be the greatest place for us to live in.
I believe in the eternal bond of Jewish people from all over the world.
I believe we'll all continue our journey of growth in this beautiful country of ours.
For more than 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has a strong vision, strategic planning, and a history of results and trust. We repurchased the land, developed its soil, the soul of our Jewish people. Today, we continue to think of tomorrow through bold initiatives. Step by step, together with 600,000 caring contributors, we're transforming the North and South into the most magnificent areas in all of Israel. Now, more than ever, we need your philanthropic investment to continue our vital work. Stand with us and support our beloved people of Israel as we rebuild and make Israel stronger than ever before.
We believe in tomorrow.
Hello, I am Maya Aaron. I am National Co-Chair of Jewish National Fund USA, Lawyers for Israel, and a partner at Mark Migdal and Hayden in Miami, Florida. Today's presentation is Antisemitism. The lawyers are coming. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A section that can be found at the bottom of your screen. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. Gabe Groisman is a Jewish community leader with a focus on fighting against anti-Semitism, strengthening the community, and building bridges between Israel and the U.S. He served as mayor of Bal Harbour, Florida for 6 years through November 2022. He wrote and passed the nation's first municipal anti-BDS ordinance, and in 2017 was the first in the nation to codify a uniform definition of anti-Semitism. Gabe has presented around the world, including at the United Nations, the Italian Parliament, the Israeli Knesset, and for groups across the country and abroad. Gabe is also a columnist with his op-ed appearing in publications such as The Daily Wire, Israel National News, Jewish News Syndicate, and more. He's a regular commentator on Spanish language TV and radio on various issues pertaining to Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish community. Gabe is a practicing attorney, founder of Groisman LLC, and a government affairs consultant. He also often advises on legal cases around the world related to protecting the Jewish community from discriminatory conduct by government and private individuals alike, including recently filing a Title VI complaint against University of Berkeley Law School, and fighting discriminatory labeling practices by the European Union. Welcome, Gabe.
Thank you so much, Maya, and thanks everyone for joining. I just want to say first that I'm ecstatic by the turnout, not because I need lots of people to listen to me on a Zoom, but because with the explosion of anti-Semitism all over the world and sort of our urge, so many of us that are involved, so many of you that are involved in the fight, to see so many people interested in figuring out how they can get involved is really inspiring. I don't have to go through the numbers here in this discussion about the explosion of anti-Semitism. Needless to say, ever since the FBI has been tracking religious-based hate crimes, the Jewish community has been atop of that list. It's been doubling, almost doubling year over year. And of course, after October 27, 2023, the numbers have just skyrocketed. The FBI report still hasn't come out for last year, but other reports like the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement's Anti-Semitism Research Center has it up to over 6,000 anti-Semitic incidents. Everybody knows it. Nobody needs the data. But everyone on this call has asked themselves the question, what can I do? In fact, this morning, I was telling Maya, this morning at 7 in the morning, I had a message in my inbox from a lawyer saying, not knowing about this, I told him to log on. Hopefully he's on. But just saying, hey, I've seen all this stuff happening. I see you're involved in so many things. I've been kicking myself for not being involved. How can I get involved? What can I do? And whenever anybody asks me, what can I do? I think of a woman named Miriam Peretz in Israel. She's known as the mother of the IDF, and she's almost the most unlikely mother of the IDF. Her two of her sons, Uriel and Eliraz, were killed in combat 12 years apart after one was killed in Israel. If you have siblings, once a child is killed in combat, the parents have to sign a waiver to allow the other kids to go into combat. She signed it, and one of her other boys was killed, and her husband died right around that time. Devastating story. But this woman grabbed what she knew how to do, which was how to teach. She was a lifelong educator and just started speaking. And she speaks. I followed her around for a story I did years ago. And she goes every single day to several army bases, to the front lines, to inspire the soldiers and the people of Israel, and particularly within the IDF. And I remember asking her, I said, Miriam, how is it that you have the strength to do this? And she says that whether we know it or not, everybody walks around with a toolbox, an invisible toolbox next to them. And when crisis hits, the best thing to do is to stick your hand into that toolbox and grab the tools that you have. And she says, the only tool I have is education. So I turn to that, and that's how I deal with my trauma and my issues. And it turns out that as lawyers, we have a big toolbox by our side. We just don't really always know how we can use it to help. So today I'm going to quickly maybe catalog in a way some of the many valiant efforts that are going on around the country by lawyers. I know you've heard from some incredible lawyers on these in this series, all of whom I'm glad to say are friends and doing incredible work. There's a wide breadth of work being done, some pro bono, some paid actually, that some organizations are trying to fund, and individual funders. A lot of the work is being done through organized Jewish organizations, and a lot of it's being done independently. Sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint what you can do. Sort of like lawyers, we understand there are things we can do, but try to understand what it is we can do in particular is sometimes difficult. So just so we're all on the same page, the idea of this presentation is to give you some ideas based on actual actions that are being taken to start the conversation, both in your head and with your colleagues, on things you can do. And I'll give you some even tools and directions of where you can think of going if you want to get more and more involved. So let's dive in a little bit. We'll go one step at a time. First, there's different buckets, as you can all imagine. First, there's types of discrimination litigation. There's different types of those disputes that you can get involved in. We'll get through it. There's litigation targeting the offenders, assault, people who commit assault and battery, etc. There's representation of students against universities and schools that's happening all over the country. There's political advocacy, which is a lot of the efforts that a lot of time I spend my efforts on political advocacy as well, on both having new laws passed that can help protect the Jewish community, but also having laws that are already on the books enforced. We've heard that a lot in national conversations on different topics, but if we're focusing on this topic, there are plenty of laws on the books for many years that can be used, but are often not. And sometimes there's always an ability to put some pressure, whether it's political pressure or legal pressure, on those decision makers to enforce the laws that are in place. Then you can also keep organizations, schools, and anti-Semitic agitators, all of them, accountable as attorneys. There's a lot of work that can be done there. And finally, legal counseling to victims. It's not fun, but it's necessary, and it's a way that many people can make an impact. Now, just going a little bit deeper, let's go into some of the tools that are available, some statutory and other tools that are available, different levers that can be pulled as attorneys. First, obviously, is when let's talk about students. There's been a lot of attention on university students, graduate students, but also K through 12. In most states, like when you talk about the educational system, they call it K through 20 education. So if you're looking for some statutes, sometimes it's under K through 20. That just includes the higher education. First, it's not as sexy, but sometimes it's the easiest place to start, is really getting an understanding when an incident occurs of student handbooks and policies at schools and universities. Generally, those are considered contractual agreements between students and the institutions. Not all the time. Everyone's a lawyer here. You understand the intricacies of it, but it's absolutely a tool that can be used, and where there's a great response many times from these educational institutions to hold them to account to their own standards. Now, next is, before we turn to federal, state anti-discrimination laws. There are plenty of laws on the books already, not directed specifically for the Jewish community or for anti-Semitism, but also specifically related to anti-Semitism, that can be utilized in our work as attorneys to try to protect Jewish students from anti-Semitism. I'm going to give you one example. Here in the state of Florida, I'm based in Miami. We have a statute that was passed just a few years ago, 1000.05, which first of all defines anti-Semitism under using the IRA definition, which I'm sure you all have heard about, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. It's the most robust and widely accepted definition about anti-Semitism. It also includes, importantly, contemporary examples of anti-Semitism, including anti-Zionism, etc. It's just a definition. But it also, and here's where the rubber meets the road for things that we all are trying to do, it prohibits discrimination against students and employees based on race, color, national origin, sex, disability, explicitly religion, and marital status. And then it says that the public institutions must deal with discrimination motivated by anti-Semitism in the same way they deal with racial discrimination. And that was done strategically by the group of us that helped put that together, actually, because we did a quick analysis of the different handbooks and policies at these universities, and all of them had robust racial discrimination rules and procedures in place, and nothing specifically for anti-Semitism. So we said we don't want more or less than anyone else. We just want the same. And it's not just a request, that is the law in the state of Florida. Of course, laws vary from state to state. So I urge you, if you're going to get involved in any incident, even from letter writing or giving advice to clients, pro bono or otherwise, first look at the state stuff, because sometimes there's some great tools there that can be used. Also, just traditional harassment and intimidation statutes that are on the books and have been for many years. Now, when we turn to federal law, everybody knows that the focus is all on Title VI, 42 U.S.C. Section 2000D. And of course, it's Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We all learned about it in law school. Prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. And for those of you who have not gone down this rabbit hole, you're probably thinking, wait, I didn't hear religion or ethnicity. How are we protected? Well, the courts have understood national origin to include ethnic discrimination based on ethnicity or ethnic characteristics. So that's been well settled. For many years, there's been a question, a debate, at least amongst the Jewish community and people trying to work on anti-Semitism issues, on whether or not we fit under Title VI. We've always made the argument that we do. That was put to bed on December 11, 2019, when President Trump issued an executive order explicitly saying that it includes anti-Semitism. To be bipartisan and totally honest, which is what we do here anyways, it's all about facts and understanding. That executive order was not overturned. It was still in place throughout the Biden administration as well, and it's still there today. Importantly, all the actions, if not all, most of the actions that you've seen, at least federally, related to protecting Jewish people around Jewish students around the country, rely on that executive order. So, but for that executive order, we'd be in a very different place. That's something that's very important. It opened the floodgates to having leverage, having something that we can tie to beyond just student handbooks that we spoke about, beyond just some state statutes, something actually federal Title VI, where there's a big body of law and procedures in place. And of course, it's all about federally funded institutions. We've seen Columbia University get their funding revoked. It's on the basis of Title VI. And that's the discussions. Those are the discussions that are happening today. You read in the papers almost every day on where that's going. And for the first time, really in the last year, Title VI actions began being filed both in the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education, and private suits in federal court. And it has not happened before. And that's, again, on the basis of that executive order that gave lawyers really the push to do it. We'll get into a few of those actions in a minute. Staying just broadly, of course, when you turn to employment discrimination, those of you who practice employment law or general counsel for a private company or such, I did lots of employment litigation, not that I wanted to, but just when I was doing commercial litigation for many years, some clients got called in to the EEOC and then some litigation, so pulled us into that. But Title VII of the Civil Rights Act explicitly prohibits employment discrimination. Here, religion is explicit there, religion as well as race, color, sex, and national origin. It's a protection from religious discrimination in employment. Employers can't discriminate on an individual based on their Jewish faith, religious belief, practices, or observances. Of course, also it's a protection from harassment and hostile work environment, which we see a lot of. I'll give one specific example about that shortly. And as you know, there's protection from retaliation. In practice, Title VII ensures that Jewish employees are legally protected against workplace discrimination connected to their identity, practices, ethnic background, or ancestry. And then, in the category of the craziness of the world we live in today, what tools do we have to deal with our new terror supporting friends that we have found here in the US, especially since October 7th? And you heard from Mark Goldfeder the other day. He's definitely the top of the food chain on this. He's a friend. We do some work together along with Maya Aaron, who I'll shout out again specifically just in a little bit. You heard from earlier, but that's the Anti-Terrorism Law, Anti-Terrorism Act 18 U.S.C. 2333, which allows U.S. citizens injured by acts of international terrorism to file civil lawsuits here against individuals or entities that commit or materially support any such act. It also specifically provides liability for aiding and abetting, and even for indirect participation, as long as they're knowingly assisting the terrorist organization. And also, as far as what remedies you have there, you can seek monetary damages. There's accountability, like I said, for indirect support, such as providing resources, financial aid, propaganda, you could put a star next to that one, or operational assistance. They have been successfully used. It has been successfully used before in other circumstances, but those cases do take a long time. It's a big pull. But there's a lot of it's a lot of pressure for someone to receive one of those lawsuits, especially if it's a valid, good lawsuit with great facts behind it. And we'll go into a big one just now. But like you can see, there are big tools and small tools that can be used by attorneys to try to help the Jewish community in the rise of anti-Semitism all over the country. We know we can't squash anti-Semitism, we can't end anti-Semitism, but as lawyers, there's much we can and should do to try to support the Jewish community. I'm sure if you're anything like me, your minds are spinning with ideas of different things. Well, maybe I can use this or do that. I've heard of these cases. They're not all big cases. There's big cases, there's small disputes, there's small issues that aren't even litigation. Advice, demand letters, victim representation, all of it that's being worked on all over the country, and of course, legislative policies, which we'll get into. That's just a quick intro. I know we're already 13, 14 minutes in, but let's start with the biggest news. So this week, our friend Mark Goldfeder from the NJAC, along with Greenberg Trorg, David Schoen, Jason Torchinsky, group of lawyers got together and filed a big lawsuit against the organizations from Columbia University and the individuals representing those organizations, including the infamous now Mahmoud Khalil. The lawsuit seeks to hold responsible those who operate as critical allies of Hamas in the US. These are New York-based organizations, an individual who, in coordination with Hamas and its affiliates, they further Hamas's continued terror attacks and actions with a pro-terror PR operation and unlawful acts. I'm quoting straight from the lawsuit. I wanted to read before going. That's filed in the U.S. District of New York, in the Southern District of New York. I'm sorry, under Anti-Terrorism Act and Alien Tort Statute. I just wanted to read you all the first line of the complaint that I pulled out after the parties. So the first line of the facts section. I think it in and of itself just encapsulate what they're trying to do there, and you can understand immediately the importance of it. Defendants in this case are Hamas's propaganda arm in New York City and on Columbia University campus. We know this because they advertise themselves as such. Their self-described acts in furtherance of their goals to assist Hamas have included terrorizing and assaulting Jewish students, unlawfully taking over, damaging public and university property on Columbia's campus, and physically assaulting Columbia University employees. They act behind veiled scarves and largely seek to be anonymous individually, yet seek to intimidate as a group. This case will pull down those scarves and unveil acts that violate this country's anti-terrorism laws. Acts, by the way, is the key word there. This case will finally hold these admitted terrorists accountable for their actions. It's time for American campuses to return to being centers for learning and to be saved from the relentless occupation by Hamas's tragically misguided cohorts. Again, the primary allegation in that case, you put two and two together of what I laid out earlier, is that the defendants aided and abetted Hamas by acting as its American propaganda arm, promoting its activities, particularly through actions at the university. It's incredibly eye-opening to read the complaint. So I urge all of you, you all know how to look up complaints, to just read the complaint, because what we all hear in the news, by the way, right wing or left wing, you read the news and it doesn't really, as a lawyer, you're hearing about these cases and it doesn't seem that they'll meet the burden because it's covered at such a surface level. But if you just read the complaint and see even the evidence that's in the complaint, evidence that they coordinated specifically to promote Hamas and incite anti-Semitic hostility. They distributed Hamas-produced propaganda, specifically, allegedly at their direction, that they coordinated with the IRGC to stage the blockades. And there's one other thing that jumped out at me that I did want to share with you all. That one of the plaintiffs, his name is Shlomi Ziv, an Israeli citizen who was a member of the security team at the Nova Music Festival, which everyone knows about. He was held hostage in Gaza for 246 days in the home of a Hamas operative who was his captor until he was rescued. If you all remember the one big rescue operation that was successful in Gaza. While Shlomi was held hostage, his captors would brag about the Hamas operatives that they're working with on university campuses. They showed him Al Jazeera stories and photographs of the Columbia University protest organized by these defendants. It's really you start understanding the connectivity there. It goes from sort of there's no way that's true to reading it and it really being eye-opening. Just to keep going, the Brandeis Center for Human Rights is a great group. Ken Marcus and Eliza Lewin, really also some of the top lawyers working on these kind of issues. They have a big lawsuit filed in the U.S. District of the Northern District of California and San Francisco against UC Berkeley. They have a plaintiff, and that's for a hostile environment under Title VI as well. And again, the facts at UC Berkeley of what's happening there is just tremendous. I filed, like we'll talk about in a little bit, I filed an a DOE complaint against them, where you don't need to have standing just to try to create pressure. Brandeis went a step further. They found a plaintiff. And what's incredible there, these cases are a lot about making good law, protecting Jewish students, and also unveiling what's actually happening. The discovery process is very, very powerful. And importantly there, the federal judge just approved the discovery to continue. Like you'd imagine in any of these cases, defendants immediately file motions to stay discovery because they don't want to have to share anything. But they did there, and the court rejected that. And now discovery is underway, which is tremendous, because to try to understand what's actually happening there is important. These are very different kinds of cases than ones most of us work on all the time, but the same tools that we use in just general litigation are really, really helpful in these kind of cases. Another interesting case I wanted to highlight was a case filed by Almog Jan, who was also kidnapped, but he was kidnapped by a Hamas operative who was being employed as a journalist by a U.S. organization. The publication was called Palestine Chronicle. The organization's called People Media Project. You can look up the case, Jan versus People Media Project. While he was being held, he was being kidnapped. He was being held hostage by this journalist, this quote unquote journalist. That case is under the Aliens Tort Statute, which, for those who don't know, is a federal law that allows non-U.S. citizens to file civil lawsuits in the U.S. for serious violations of international law or human rights abuses. That case, in my opinion, is going to turn on whether the defendants knew or didn't know he was a Hamas operative. Again, discovery is key in that case. There was a motion to dismiss. It looks like, from looking at the docket, it's going to be amended. All these cases build on each other. These cases, like everybody here knows, take many years, but they take steps. The steps that are taken throughout the case are powerful in and of themselves. And just in covering the network creates pressure and changes behavior, which is ultimately what we're trying to do here. Just a quick word on the Title VI complaints at the Department of Education. We know in the last year and a half, since October 7th, they've been flooded with complaints. There is no standing requirement. You just need to be a concerned individual. Like I said earlier, with Arsen Ostrovsky, a guy from Israel who has another great organization that works on these issues. The two of us filed a Title VI complaint there. We couldn't get a plaintiff, to be honest, because we were talking to many students. They were giving us all the information, but it takes something to want to be a plaintiff in one of these cases. Your name is out there forever. Brandeis was able to do it. We weren't able to, but we filed a very, very strong complaint with lots of evidence. And like you can guess, it just sat there with everybody else. Luckily, once the Brandeis case was filed, it was subsumed into the federal lawsuit. But those cases mostly just sat there. Under the new administration, though, that same office, the Civil Rights Office, has opened. Everybody's read about this in the papers, but just tying it all together for you. Investigations, independent, proactive investigations against, I believe, 17 universities, all based on Title VI. Are they providing enough protections under Title VI? If they're not, the federal government is not allowed to fund them under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Just so you know, we can keep an eye on Columbia sued the federal government to challenge the $400 million, mostly based on notice requirements, etc., that are administrative. They're not in the statute. And that's what those cases will turn on. From my standpoint, Columbia does not have a strong legal basis there. You understand why they're fighting. There's a lot of money at stake. I know I'm going fast, so forgive me. How do these cases settle? Like, what are we trying to achieve? What are many lawyers trying to achieve? Of course, every case is different. But if you look, for example, at Harvard, they still have another case pending with Shabbos Kestenbaum, who you might have heard from here or not, but I had him on my podcast a few months ago going through his case. But the settlement, as I understand it, they reached on their other lawsuit. It has to do with policies, right? I mean, what we are trying to do, and there is no 100% collective we, because everyone has their own strategies and ideas. But in general, we're trying to fix the system in a way that our students can be protected and they can just go to school and not get indoctrinated and not get attacked as they're walking to school and not getting barricaded like they are in the University of California's. So in Harvard, the terms, as far as I understand, is to implement that definition of anti-Semitism, the IRA definition, into their anti-discrimination policies. To hire some anti-Semitism expert, whatever that means, to oversee compliance. It's better than what they didn't have before. And then hosting mandatory educational presentations by leading experts, who, by the way, I believe are even listed in the agreement. I haven't seen the agreement, but my understanding of it is as such. And the idea, again, is to create reform there, to create an environment where our students can just go to school, right? That's all they want to do. I've got a daughter going to college next year. All of their class, this is all they're talking about. And none of them are looking to go to war on their campus. They're just looking to go to school. And that's something that I think all of us would want, obviously. I'm also working on a case with Maya and NJAC as well, and David Schoen. Maya's the lead on that case, and her firm, Mark Migdal. They're putting in a lot of incredible time and work on that. And that's a case against the Associated Press. We all remember the news story that broke that the Associated Press had hired a Hamas photographer. That's the allegation in the lawsuit. Our group got together, found some plaintiffs, and that were impacted on October 7th in the worst of ways, and filed a lawsuit against the Associated Press for aiding and abetting terrorism, conspiracy, material support. And the allegation is that they knew about it. They knew what this guy's affiliation was. And this case is incredible, and it's an incredible example. They're not easy cases. The case got dismissed. We amended. Discovery continues. There, again, discovery, we were excited. Discovery started. It was robust discovery, except everything was confidential. And I'll be careful what I speak about because the case is still pending. But there was an order last week, which was a huge order, unsealing these documents. So the majority of the documents, the critical ones they would just mark as confidential to try to protect them from getting out there. The order came in last week, reversing that, and that's just huge. I mean, if you're involved in one of these cases, you understand getting the information is step one, getting it out there in the public domain is step two. And again, this is all about changing behavior and changing standards. You can hire photographers, you can publish pictures. You just can't hire terrorist photographers. You can't hire terrorists for anything. That's the law. Those are the allegations in the case. I'm sure the Associated Press's lawyers, if they're on, disagree, and they have a great venue to make that disagreement in the U.S. District Court of South Florida. Now I just want to shift for the last few minutes on state legislative efforts. There's lots of work that can be done. It's all being handled by different lawyers. I'm involved in some of these issues, not in all of them. But there's the Combat Anti-Semitism movement, for example, is taking the lead on having IRA adopted. It's already adopted in many states, but having it adopted in various states within the policies of the educational institutions, K through 20, creating those standards to combat anti-Semitism, and then creating a Title VI coordinator within the state. So this is all about answering problems, right? So if the federal government, if the Department of Education is sitting on complaints, which they were, and even still, it's not the most efficient office, let's say, and who knows what the future of that office is anyways. So let's create that mechanism at the state level where complaints can go to someone in the state. In every state, it's somewhere different, and they can report it every year, whether it's to the Attorney General or to the legislature, to create accountability. And then the state legislature can say, hey, we don't have to fund your university if you're not protecting students. All students protected under Title VI, including Jewish students. And just so you guys can keep your eye on it, these are being passed in Tennessee, or they're working their way through. You can't say passed until they're passed. States like Tennessee, Arkansas, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, South Carolina, hopefully, and Kentucky. Many other states were in discussions with them, or they're in discussions with them in different capacities. Everyone's trying to do something everywhere. In Florida, we're in the middle of, we, the Jewish community, are in the middle of expanding BDS protections. That's an effort led by Joe Sabag and some other folks. So there's a lot of work happening at the state legislative level. The last thing I wanted to leave you with is we talked about all these big cases. There's lots of other work that needs to be done. I spoke to Didi Bitran, who I know is part of this network. She also works at Stand With Us. She's the head of their pro bono network. She was telling me that before October 7th, that organization, just an example, was getting 400 inquiries a year, 400. After October 7th, they're getting over 150 every month. Okay, so they're being flooded with questions, with requests, with inquiries for lawyers looking for help. They have a big pro bono network for people who want to get involved. A lot of it has to do with employment law and discrimination, Title VII work. Everything from a waitress being called Anne Frank at work, which is a true story, to corporations making policies that directly target Jewish employees. And just so you know, there's tons of work to be done. You don't always have to be out front. You don't have to file lawsuits. You can write letters. You can do research. There are lots of groups like that, the AAJLJ, American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. My friend Rob Garson's the president there. Lawfare Project. There's lots of different groups that are doing all this kind of work. And also, not everything rises to a level of a lawsuit, but can really use a lawyer. Think about Title VI. Think about K through 12, when you're not talking about university students. Sometimes having a lawyer write a demand letter, pressure the schools to just abide by the law and abide by their own policies can really make a huge difference. And I lied, I said that was my last thing. My last thing is about representing criminal victims. This hasn't happened so much this year, but there's one great example of someone who was attacked in his house in Tampa, in the Tampa area, reached out to me. I'm not sure how. I started making phone calls of other lawyers. This guy showed up at his hearing for his protective order as the victim with 3 attorneys. 3 attorneys from big reputable law firms showed up and have been holding his hand throughout this process because they are prosecuting that case against the defendants there. So he's taking an active role, and he is not there alone. He called me this morning to give me an update, again, not knowing that I was doing this. So the work never ends. There's so much work to be done. Coordination is an issue that we're trying to work it. Then that is the global we're trying to work on. There is something that was put together now called the Institute for Litigation Coordination with 25 orgs. I'm not sure all the organizations that have signed on to it yet, but it's trying to put people together. You guys heard about the JNF Lawyers for Israel database, also critical, because if you have a group of lawyers that want to work on things, it's important to tell each other what we're doing. So that way there can be some coordination. There's always risks involved in this, especially when we don't coordinate. So, I hope what I leave you with as I'm closing here, right on the dot of the time they gave me, is that there are so many things that can be done as attorneys. There are many organizations. You could do it individually. You could do it pro bono, or you could do it, try to find sort of a bigger project to work on that's funded at least partially. But at the end of the day, it's critical to use the tools you have in your toolbox to take the fight on. And I can tell you on a personal note, everyone I know that gets involved in this kind of work that's an attorney, even if it's just on the side, just a few cases or one case or one matter, it changes the rest of your year. It gives you so much, such a feel-good exercise of what we're doing as lawyers and why we have this degree. It reminds us why, we all graduated from school and went through that process years ago. It gives us that strength. So with that, we're going to open it up to some questions that I think Steve is moderating. And thank you so much for your attention. Nobody interrupted, but that's because we're on webinar mode. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabe. Really appreciate your thoughts and comments. And you certainly prompted quite a few questions. And I'll try to compile some of them and offer them in a way that tries to address most of them. But let me start with what is probably on a lot of people's minds. You mentioned in your remarks quite a few different organizations that are leading some of these efforts. Can you give us maybe the top 3 or 4 so that people, if they do want to go and quickly volunteer or find resources, the ones that you recommend people pursue as a first step?
At the risk of upsetting my friends in this sector, But the ones here's where I think Stand With Us has a great group for volunteers, in particular for pro bono lawyers, to get those phone calls. Mark Goldfeder, who you heard from, he's in Atlanta with the NJAC, the National Jewish Advocacy Council. The Brandeis Center is fantastic. They have like their whole law firm, but they partner up with people all the time. Lawfare Project also has a big volunteer basis. That's Brooke Goldstein out of New York and Florida. She's fantastic. On the legislative side, I mentioned them before. I do some work with them. Combat Antisemitism movement is doing a lot of work on the legislative side, especially this year. Those are really the groups. And I'll tell you, don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, this is like a godsend when they get a phone call or an email from an attorney that says, hey, I'd love to help one way or the other. Is there anything I can do? I promise you they're going to answer those emails. If they don't, please reach out to me and I'll make sure they do within seconds.
Great, thank you. And there were several requests for citations to the different lawsuits that you had mentioned, Columbia, the one being led by Brandeis. Can we furnish that to the people that are listening at some point post seminar?
Yeah, we can put them together. I don't have it in my notes.
Right.
But you could tell I litigated for 16 years, and then for the last 4 years, primarily do government affairs work, other than this Jewish community type litigation. So I don't use the citations anymore. But I'll provide them without a problem.
That would be great. And there was another question, and this is something that I think Maya and I can respond to at a later point. On what Lawyers for Israel, GNF's Lawyers for Israel, how we might be able to help coordinate some of these efforts. And so in response to that question, we will reconvene after this, the co-chairs, and see if we can come up with any kind of an action plan. But what I would suggest to those who are listening, anyone who is interested in helping in that effort, to please come forward and help us to do that. So Gabe, another question that actually I have that you didn't touch on a little bit, but there has been efforts at local levels. And the one that I'm familiar with in particular is teachers' unions for local and state levels seem to have been infiltrated with anti-Semitic propaganda that is pushing for anti-Semitic curricula in the K through 12 area. And can you share any thoughts on how lawyers at the local and state level might be able to help address that?
Yeah, I'm thinking immediately of Marissa Straight. She's the CEO of PragerU. I have this podcast I keep mentioning because I get to speak to these interesting people and learn from them. She's the CEO of PragerU, and they highlight a lot of this. And you can agree with them or disagree with them on their politics, but to look at them look at the work they've done on uncovering exactly what you're talking about, Steve. When I heard it at first, I thought, oh, come on, it's probably an overreaction. I kind of have that. I have the opposite reflex as most people. Most people jump, oh, it must be anti-Semitism. I always say, it's probably an overreaction. And then you dig in, and many times it's worse than you could have imagined. And that's one case. And it's not just the teachers' unions that have put out specific policies, and the two biggest teachers unions in the country, and I don't remember their names offhand, but in their national conferences over the last several years have taken on the quote unquote Free Palestine movement and everything that goes with it explicitly. So we're seeing a lot of that type of indoctrination happening at the school level, the work that you can do about it. And by the way, one more note, it's also happening at the state level. In California, it was codified in their ethnic studies curriculum. You guys can look it up. Many of us worked on it, got it pocket vetoed 1 year, but it came back and it was almost as bad as the first time, maybe a little better or a little less bad, let's say. But that's a fight that can be had every single day in every school district on what those teachers are teaching our kids. The school unions, the teacher unions is a bigger fight, but as far as attorneys wanting to get involved in things, paying attention to what's happening on your school boards, don't let the political circus that surrounds school boards these days, because there is one, dissuade you from being there, because you still have to pay attention and get involved. And again, a good lawyer being involved on these issues can create some serious pressure to make sure we can protect our kids.
Right. Well, in the scenario that I'm familiar with, it's not only protecting our kids, but it has created a hostile work environment for the Jewish teachers who feel, that their voices are not being heard, and they feel threatened by the approach that the anti-Semitic propaganda is taking.
Yeah, and it's not just in schools. I mean, when you get the kind of calls I get, and many of us, I'm sure, on this call get, it could be disheartening, but I refuse to be disheartened by it. But it could be disheartening. I had a series of calls with one of the top, let's say, 20 corporations in the country, and they have these groups for their employees on chats, and it's all based on race and religion and gender and all these different things. It's almost like taking us back to pre-1964. And the Jewish group wanted to bring speakers. Actually, they wanted to bring me, and they got refused, that they couldn't bring because they're not considered a minority. And so just trying to navigate that. And again, not everything is litigation. A lot of it is counseling, and just counseling people how to deal with these issues. It happens. It's happening everywhere right now.
And I think for lawyers that are in big firms, and they may be able to undertake kind of pro bono efforts, but for lawyers that are in smaller firms or solo practitioners, it's much harder to devote the kind of resources that may be necessary to pursue litigation. But in the counseling effort, that does not require the same amount of resources, and it's certainly something that most of us can do if we educate ourselves a little bit more on the various statutes and precedents. There was a couple of brief questions, one related to using the Anti-Terrorism Act. Are you familiar with or aware of any precedent where affiliate groups have been held responsible for the acts of other terrorists? Are you someone asked if there were any precedent?
It's funny. I thought someone was going to ask me that. I even pulled the case, but not the citation. You're going to have to Google it or Chat GPT it. Lindy versus Arab Bank. I wrote Pank, but Arab Bank in 2015 was a successful incident when it had to do with financing terror activities. So they were running their money through the bank here in the U.S. On being used for these things, it's novel. I mean, we're really in green field for litigation and for lawmaking. When you're talking about, when would you imagine that you'd have student groups that are taking orders from terrorist organizations, or U.S. media companies hiring people that are members of terror organizations, funding a major aspect, one of the three prongs of a terror organization, which is propaganda, right? And not just working with them, but funding them. So it's new. A lot of it's novel. There are lots of discussions about, there's big debates with many people that are all well-intentioned. They're wrong and I'm right. No, I'm joking. But there's a lot of tension between the fear of making bad law, right? So traditionally, in the Jewish community, we don't really want to get involved in these things. Let's just handle it quietly. I'll just share my philosophy is that we have to fight on every fight, and we have to fight every fight and fight every battle, because just fighting wins, right? Just being able to put up an argument helps move the ball forward. And I'm defending a case on the other side, a ludicrous case that's been pending in the U.S. District Court of D.C. for the last, 7 years. But it makes a difference. The Jewish organizations listen to these cases, and it impacts the way we do our work, not having to deal with these lawsuits. So on our side of the ledger, we should be doing the same thing. That's just my opinion.
Right. Another question that someone just posed, which I think a lot of us think about a lot, is distinguishing between anti-Israel statements and anti-Semitism.
Sure.
And I wonder if you could share some of your thoughts on that.
I'd love to. Okay, so first of all, I spend most of my time dealing with exactly this issue. So first of all, when we're talking about any of these legal actions that are being taken, none of it has to do with speech. None of it. It only has to do with conduct, with anti-Semitic conduct. When you're passing a definition of anti-Semitism, it's just to define something anti-Semitic. Then what you do with it is what matters. When you're talking about speech that people are saying something somewhere, they can say whatever they want. But harassment intimidation, assault, calls for violence. Those are all in a different category of their conduct. But to answer specifically, because I'm not trying to avoid the question, the IHRA definition actually does a really nice job. Everyone knows, hopefully, Natan Sharansky. Natan Sharansky is the most famous refusenik. And he came up with the definition. So how do you, when you're specific, how do you know when anti-Zionism turns into anti-Semitism? And he comes up with the 3 Ds. So when you're talking about delegitimization, demonization, or double standards. So if you're trying to delegitimize the existence of the state of Israel, the very existence of the country, if you're trying to demonize them, meaning blame them for all the wills of the world, or ills of the world, I'm sorry, or you're applying a double standard towards Israel, then it's likely anti-Semitism. It's of course not a perfect definition, but I think it's as close as you can get on it. And my final word on that is, when I used to work on the anti-BDS stuff, boycott, divest, and sanctions work, people used to always make these arguments of, well, boycott isn't actually always anti-Semitic. Maybe it's a good tool to use. It's a political tool. It's been used in the past. And I can make those arguments. Any of us who have litigated anything, you can make arguments on both sides all the time. But what's a really important point to make is that in practice, just go see it with your own eyes. You can show up at any of these events. You can read their materials. It's almost always, I mean, over 99% of the time, just blatant anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm. We're running out of time, but I would like to provide one final question for you before I turn it back to Maya. And this is more of a personal one for you, Gabe.
Love it.
What kind of reactions have you received personally from your kind of outspoken and pretty visible activities in trying to address anti-Semitism?
You get the whole gamut, a lot more negative than positive. But what's more important to me, and I'm not being cheesy, anyone who's on this call who knows me knows this to be the case. Like, as long as my family, my wife and my kids and my parents and, the people closest to me know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, then I'm okay with it. Do you get tons of threats and emails and messages and letters and all the time? But for me, it doesn't dissuade me at all. It kind of does the exact opposite of it. The hardest part maybe is on the professional level. That's the part that's most public, but not the way I make my living, right? So people think, okay, is how you do that all day. I'm like, no, like today, I work for 4 hours before this. I'll work for another 9 after this, right? But this is the part that's public. So sometimes that's hard because you're sort of pigeonholed as the guy who does that kind of work. But the truth is, these days, despite the fact that I suffer from being a complete optimist in life, and including in this scenario, I think we're going to turn the page. I think it's gone too far in our country. I think the pendulum's going to swing back. I think the war in Israel is going to come to a close, and Israel is going to have an era of prosperity and strength, both economically and militarily. We're all going to enjoy for the next 20, 30 years. But for right now, we're in the thick of it. And if we don't get moving, if we don't stand up, if we don't get to work, not just saying things, but actually being involved in things, especially as lawyers, that we can use the tools that we have in our toolbox to do something, we're going to regret it for the next 20 years. So this is our opportunity to really make an impact, and that's the way I look at it.
Well, thank you very much, Gabe. You certainly serve as quite a shining example that all of us can hope to aspire to. So let me turn it over to Maya now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I especially want to thank our guest speaker, Gabe Groisman, for his amazing expertise and insights on this important topic. We are so grateful for all the work that you're doing. All attorneys attending our CLE program today will receive an email tomorrow with a link to your CLE attendance certificate. Please remember that we cannot guarantee that this program qualifies for CLE credit in all states. Please consider joining Lawyers for Israel. When you receive your CLE attendance certificate, we ask you to join Lawyers for Israel with a minimum annual donation of $1,800. Let's rebuild Israel together. I'm Israel High.